Hello YouTubers, this is Yessie Blue coming at you with another episode of Witchy and Bitchy. And again, I'm doing another deep dive on one of my favorite television shows right now on television because there's not too many things that are original. And of course, I'm going to be covering American Gods. Now, American Gods has always been amazing as far as the imagery and the acting and the writing. And season 3 was kind of a nail-biter in some ways. It was a little slower than the first 2 seasons, but I think in the end it packed a pretty good punch with this messaging. So I like this show in particular because I loved how they incorporated the Orishas from Western Africa into the 3rd season. And my hat goes off to Bilquis and how she transformed from a man-eater and man-sucker. And guys, that's a PG-13 description. And she transforms from this to a goddess who regains her power by tapping into the we power. So in this episode of Witchy or Bitchy, we're going to do a deep dive and begin to understand what the we power is, how it pertains to ancestor worship, and how you can get in on some of this action and start tapping into the we power like Bilquis. So stay tuned for that. So the 3rd season, you see this amazing vignette of the slaves of America worshiping their old gods from Yoruba land. And we all know that the old gods from the western part of Africa are known as the Orishas. My hat is off to Neil Gaiman. I could kiss him if he was in front of me because this takes a lot of guts. Him and the creators of American Gods season 3 had balls of steel to talk openly about the Orishas and Orisha worship. And the one thing that people don't understand is that for hundreds upon hundreds of years, ancestor worship was outlawed. And those who were caught worshiping the ancestors, the Orishas, or practicing any type of pagan rituals or religions were openly persecuted. They were whipped, they were beaten, they were mangled by wild dogs, they were locked away in cellars, they were ostracized and torn away from their family. Any type of punishment that you can imagine is what happened to these people. And they did this because they were openly practicing their indigenous cultures and religions. Time with slavery in the United States and also throughout the diaspora, people began to get rewarded for converting into Christianity. So if you became Christian, you could be a person, for a lack of better words. You would be considered a person in God's eyes and not a slave. If you were Christian, you could get married. If you were Christian, you could have a family and your family wouldn't be torn apart because you wouldn't be a family of savages, you would be a family of Christians, right? If you were a Christian, you could become a carpenter, you could become a cook, you could become a blacksmith, you could become a shoemaker, so being Christian afforded you a great deal of additional opportunities. So naturally, the African slaves didn't want to abandon their indigenous religions. After all, it was the ancestors who helped them survive the horrors of slavery. So they had this really great idea. They would synchronize the African gods with Catholic saints. And so this gave birth to the practice of Santeria in the Caribbean islands, hoodoo in the American South, and candomblé in Brazil. This allowed slaves to worship their gods and, of course, the Catholic gods. And they did this using altars and other types of paraphernalia. I once got into an argument with a young man who honestly wanted to know why people of color, and particularly those of us who have African descendancy, would want to study the religions of our ancestors. Besides, they practiced voodoo and they worshiped witch doctors and they performed animal sacrifices. So in his own polite way, but ignorant way, he was saying that the ways of the African ancestors were very primitive. Now, naturally, my counter argument was not that African practices were primitive. Rather, they were very much misunderstood, especially from those who have grown accustomed to the ways of the Western world. We have to understand that the continent of Africa consists of millions upon millions of cultures and languages and customs and religions. And many of these religions supersede that of many of the Western religions and even the Eastern religions. The one strike that I can say that counts against people of the African continent is that a lot of their content wasn't written down, or if it was written down, it was destroyed and it didn't survive. Because the African continent, the people of the African continent don't have any type of written documentation. There's no Bible, there's no literature that actually defines or captures their cultures and customs, then people automatically jump to the belief that they didn't have it, which is ridiculous, right? And so the one thing that people don't understand about African religions and African ancestry and African people is that they didn't write anything down because they didn't need to. It wasn't in their custom to write things down, because if they needed something, they would actually have rituals to get the information that they needed from the ancestors. That's one of the reasons why ancestor worship was very important to them, and that's why I believe that ancestor worship is important to people now. So now you're probably thinking, man, Yessie Blue, she is talking crazy talk. I tuned in to hear about American gods and the Orishas, not this crazy voodoo talk. All right, so for you guys who are disbelievers, I'm going to drop a couple of science bombs, because I want you guys to understand that because something appears to be very primitive on the outside, there's actually a great deal of depth and a great deal of complexity to the rituals and the ceremonies that our ancestors performed, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and drop some knowledge on you, because I'm not the only one who believes that you can actually get information from the ancestors. There's a British scholar, and his name is Rupert Sheldrake, with an amazing British accent. I love his accent. And so he believes in this universal field, and he coined it morphic resonance, right? And so morphic resonance is simply the belief that memories are stored in matter. And as we know, everything is matter. Our bodies are matter. The earth is matter. Space is matter. Everything is matter, right? He also goes on to say that certain species inherit memories from their ancestors. So we as human beings inherit certain memories from our ancestors. So when you have that baby comes out and knows to cry, and when it begins to cry, it begins to breathe. That's a memory that inherited from his ancestors. When you nuzzle that baby onto your breast, the baby actually begins to suck milk from your nipple, if you're a woman, of course, not from a man, but the baby begins to suck that milk from the nipple. That is part of the memories that inherited from its ancestors. All right, so it's kind of complicated, but I'm going to break this down in a way that's a lot simpler for you. Let's just say that you wanted to go out and buy a computer. Let's say it's a laptop, maybe an Apple or a Dell. You want to get fancy. So you do your research, fully understanding that the laptop only has so much storage space. Yet, lucky for you, there's iCloud. And with the iCloud, you can store basically everything that you need. So there's no need for you to have a lot of information on your actual computer. Why would you do that when you can access whatever you need from the iCloud? Now, let's take this step a little further, shall we? Let's just say that you want to have access to the internet, right? You turn on your Wi-Fi and voila, you're automatically connected to everything and almost everyone on God's green earth. You have access to a great amounts of information and knowledge and people, you name it. And not only that, you can download onto your actual computer, or you can store the information onto your actual cloud. The one thing that's good about that is that you have access to it and you can retrieve it whenever you feel like you need to. Now, this is the concept that can be associated or applied to morphic resonance and ancestor worship. You, my friend, are the computer. You can only store so much information, but lucky for you, there's the iCloud, right? And so some people would refer to the iCloud in this, a metaphor, I'm guessing, as the realm of the ancestors or the Akashic records, right? Whatever you believe in. And then, you can retrieve this information whenever you need it, right? But let's just say you're a person of African descent, right? And if you're a person of African descent, then you've probably downloaded some level of malware because, being a slave is a very traumatic event. Let's be real here, right? And so when you download that malware, all the files are corrupted and your computer is simply ruined. You can't access Wi-Fi, you can't surf the internet, and you don't have access to your own information or anyone else's, right? This is what happens when you take people's languages, cultures, and religions away. They become ineffective and inoperable. This is why the power of the ancestors is very important. And that's why I said, if Neil Gaiman is watching this, I want to send you 100 million kisses, because this is something that we have been trying to communicate and inform people about for hundreds upon hundreds of years. All right, so wonderful job with American Gods. Now, Neil Gaiman is a storyteller, so he's not going to be preachy like I am about the wee power and about ancestor worship. And so what he does is he actually uses Bilquis. And Bilquis is an amalgamation of all the distressed slaves. In the book, she is a prostitute, right? In the movie, she's not a prostitute, but yet she still preys on innocent victims who, of course, we can still call Johns, right? And so what you do is you see her make this transition from being a very disgruntled prostitute, someone who is hungry for worship and hungry for love and hungry for that sexual desire, into someone who is fully fleshed out, for lack of better words. So naturally, we can take this step further, and we can take it back to Bilquis. And my hat's off to Neil Gaiman, because he did a great job with Bilquis. Because I believe in American Gods, she represents the amalgamation of African slaves. I think that was the whole point of this season 3. Bilquis is someone who's probably had the greatest transformation throughout the show, because when she first started, she was distressed and very disgruntled. She was downtrodden. She was down on her luck. And from what I've heard in the book, she's actually a prostitute, but in the actual American Gods series, she's not. So she kind of preys on Johns, for lack of better words. Her thing is to get people to worship her. And through that worship, she's consuming their sexual energy, much like a succubi, right? But as you see Bilquis' progression throughout season 3, you see her kind of getting sickened by the whole process. She's just been doing it for so long, and she realizes that this is not something that's sustainable. She's going to have to evolve into someone else. She's showing this huge CEO guy, I'm guessing he's like a Jeff Bezos, equivalent to a Jeff Bezos guy, a great time. Again, I'm keeping this PG-13 for all those kiddies out there who are probably watching my videos. I don't know why you're watching a video about American Gods, but you know what I mean. And so, she goes ahead into her whole ritual where she consumes him and devours him, right? And then she's realizing, hey, listen, I made a huge mistake. Like, this guy wasn't a regular Joe Smo I picked off the street. Like, this guy was someone really important. His cronies come after her. She's trying to figure out, what is she going to do now? A long story short, she gets abducted. And when she's imprisoned, she begins to have these visions, right? And she envisions Yemaja, she envisions Oshun, and they begin to tell her, hey, listen, you've forgotten who you were. You've forgotten how to tap into the we power. You've forgotten about the ancestors. You've forgotten that you were a queen. You've forgotten that you were a goddess, right? When she begins to tap into this power, you see her becoming this powerful goddess, right? And then she's no longer a man-eater. She's no longer someone who preys on people's sexual weaknesses and sexual desires. In fact, she's made a transition between that to becoming somebody who actually inspires. And so she becomes to me more like an Oshun type of character, as opposed to a prostitute or a woman who is wanton, for lack of better words. So again, this series, season 3, I have to say is my least favorite season, but I think that with a lot of the visuals and a lot of the messaging, it's one of the best for me. I think it compensates for the other qualities that I didn't like in an American Gods season 3. All right, so that's the video. I would like for you guys to sound off. Do you think that this whole concept of the we power is witchy or bitchy? Do you think that it's important to understand the power of the ancestors? Do you do ancestor worship? What are your stories as far as finding the ancestors and becoming more powerful as a person? I would like to hear about it. And of course, I will respond. And if you like this video, I would appreciate it if you guys would like and share and subscribe. And also, I would love for you guys to download my book, Phantom's Row. I want to tell people about the ancestors and the Orisha and the Loa. And I do it through stories. So if you could download this book and start reading it, that'd be great. And the best thing about it is that it's actually free. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off, and I want you guys to stay tuned for the next episode of Witchy or Bitchy. Peace out.